Resolution on Education Policy, 1913 and 1906, the progressive state of Baroda introduced compulsory primary education throughout its territories. National leaders urged the government to do so for British India. Gokhale, as a member of the Imperial Legislative Council, raised the issue in his resolution of 1910. He called for primary education to be made compulsory in those areas where at least 35% of 6 to 7-year-old boys were receiving instruction. State governments and local authorities to decide cost of education, the need to establish a separate Department of Education under the central government for taking necessary steps to introduce compulsory education, and for a secretary to be appointed for education to monitor the progress and prepare budget report. The government assured him that the idea would be considered, upon which Gokhale withdrew the resolution. Though the government established the Education Department under the central government and appointed a secretary for education, the main demand for free and compulsory primary education was ignored. Gokhale then raised the issue by bringing in a bill in March 1911 calling for the introduction of free and compulsory primary education in a phased manner. The bill was, however, rejected by a select committee. The government came up with its resolution on education policy in 1913. The government refused to take up the responsibility of compulsory education, but accepted the policy of removal of illiteracy and urged provincial governments to take early steps to provide free elementary education to the poorer and more backward sections. Private efforts were to be encouraged for this, and the quality of secondary schools was to be improved. A university, it was decided, was to be established in each province, and teaching activities of universities were to be encouraged. Regarding women's education, it was suggested that there should be curriculum of practical utility for girls, and that examination of girls should not get much importance. However, there should be an increase in the number of women teachers and inspectors. Sadler University Commission 1917-19. In 1917, the Government of India appointed the Calcutta University Commission, commonly called the Sadler Commission after its chairman, Michael Sadler. The commission was set up to study and report on problems of Calcutta University, but its recommendations were applicable more or less to other universities also. It reviewed the entire field from school education to university education. It held the view that for the improvement of university education, improvement of secondary education was a necessary precondition. Its observations were as follows. 1. School course should cover 12 years. Students should enter university after an intermediate stage rather than matric for a 3-year degree course in university. This was done to A. Prepare students for university stage, B. Relieve universities of a large number of below university standard students, and C. Provide collegiate education to those not planning to go through university stage. A separate board of secondary and intermediate education should be set up for administration and control of secondary and intermediate education. 2. There should be less rigidity in framing university regulations. A university should function as a centralized, unitary residential teaching autonomous body, rather than as scattered affiliated colleges. 4. Female education, applied scientific and technological education, teachers training, including those for professional and vocational colleges, should be extended. In 1920, the government recommended the Sadler Report to the provincial governments. The Sadler Commission recommendations had a great influence on the development of education in the next few decades. In the period from 1916 to 1921, 7 new universities came up: Mysore, Patna, Benares, Aligarh, Dhaka, Lucknow, and Osmani. Soon after came more universities such as Delhi, Agra, and Annamalai in Madras. Teaching so far had been the function of degree colleges, and there was no provision for postgraduate education. The functions of the Calcutta, Bombay, and Madras universities were to provide affiliation, conduct examinations, and confer degrees. But now, the number of teaching universities and residential universities increased. With the introduction of honors courses, there was an increase in academic activities in the universities and colleges. Studies of different Indian languages began. Facilities for higher studies and research were also created. The post of professor was created in the universities. The Department of Education was opened in Calcutta and Dhaka universities. Internal administration of the universities improved. The Academic Council was created to deal with such matters as curriculum construction, examination, and research. This helped to improve the academic standard of the universities. In 1925, an inter-university board was set up to coordinate among the different Indian universities. For the first time, students' welfare became an important matter in universities, and a board of students' welfare was formed in each university. However, the recommendations of the commission have been criticized for being too advanced for the time, and that many of the new things suggested were not suitable in the circumstances existing at the time. Education under diarchy, under Montagu-Chelmsford reforms. Education was shifted to provincial ministries, and the government stopped taking direct interest in educational matters, while government grants, liberally sanctioned since 1902, were now stopped. Financial difficulties prevented any substantial expansion, but still education grew, especially under philanthropic efforts. Hartog Committee, 1929, an increase in the number of schools and colleges had led to deterioration of education standards. The Hartog Committee was set up by the Simon Commission as an auxiliary committee under the chairmanship of Philip Hartog to prepare a report on education. The main findings and recommendations of the committee were as follows. Primary education. There were serious shortcomings in the primary education system as it existed. Quantitative expansion of primary schools was not enough. Improvement in their quality was necessary. There was a lot of wastage and stagnation. The withdrawal of children from a school at any stage constituted wastage, as the money and time spent had failed to give the children literacy. The reasons for children being withdrawn were mainly poverty, ignorance, caste barriers, religious conservatism, seasonal diseases, and agricultural failure. Stagnation meant the detention of children in the same classes for more than one academic year. This, in turn, led to withdrawal of the children from schools. The reasons for such stagnation were that most schools were run by just one teacher. Teachers were not well qualified. There was a lack of women teachers, schools were often short-lived, and there was a lack of school inspection. Recognizing that primary school education was of national importance, the committee recommended that the government should be responsible for the control and inspection of primary schools. It said that primary education should be for 4 years. The school timings and the curriculum should be such as to suit the environment and conditions of the locality where they are, and the subjects selected should have practical value for the students. There should be refresher courses and training programs to improve the quality of primary school teachers. School inspection should increase in number as well as in efficiency. Primary schools should serve as community centers that could provide adult education, medical relief, and facilities for recreation to the people of rural areas. Secondary school education. The defects of secondary education included the fact that it was highly examination-oriented, and there was a large number of failures in the matriculation examination. It recommended the introduction of a more diversified curriculum. Students would benefit from the introduction of alternative courses in the high schools, as the students could then choose courses according to their aptitude. The committee recommended the inclusion of industrial and commercial subjects. Higher education, though the focus of the committee was on primary education, it also evaluated the condition of higher education. It found that the standard of education was low, there was overcrowding in universities, and libraries were not well equipped. The committee suggested that affiliated universities be established besides unitary and residential universities, the condition of university libraries be improved, honors courses be opened, and students be admitted on the basis of abilities and aptitudes. The committee asserted the importance of developing learned and liberal-minded individuals who would be capable of undertaking responsibilities. Women's education. Regarding women's education, the committee recommended that the education of boys and girls should get equal importance, more primary schools for girls should be established, and the curriculum should include hygiene, home science, and music in secondary schools. Attention should also be given to the training of women for teaching jobs. The report of the Hartog Committee was effective to an extent in improving the quality of primary education. However, the quantitative expansion suffered. Secondary school education improved. The number of affiliated colleges also went up. Sargent Plan of Education. Sir John Sargent, the educational advisor to the government of India, was deputed to draw up a memorandum for the development of Indian education after the Second World War. His memorandum was submitted to the Central Advisory Board of Education in 1944. The report analyzed the prevailing situation in education and provided a long-term plan for educational development in India. It gave details of programs and schemes directed towards reconstructing the education system. The aim of the plan was to bring about universal literacy in India within 40 years of its introduction. The main recommendations made in the report were as follows. There should be free pre-primary education for children between the years of 3 and 6, the objective being to give the children social experience. The teachers in these nursery schools should be women adequately trained for the work. There should be universal, compulsory, and free education for the 6 to 14 years age group. This group would be divided into 2 stages, namely junior basic 6 to 11 and senior basic 11-14. The fundamental principle of education at this level should be learning through activity. There should be an emphasis on learning some basic craft or crafts suited to local needs and conditions. Activities at the senior basic level should include physical training and organized games. High school education should be for a period of 6 years for selected children from the age of 11 years. The selected students must be well above the average ability and have exceptional aptitude for higher studies. Fees may be charged, but there would also be studentships, and the poor could get scholarships. There were to be 2 streams in high schools, academic and technical vocational. The high schools in the academic sphere will impart instruction in the arts and pure sciences, while the high school in the technical sphere will provide training in applied sciences and industrial and commercial subjects. The curriculum in both spheres will include art and music, and all girls should be taught domestic science. The mother tongue would be the medium of instruction in all high schools, while English would be a compulsory second language. Students were not to leave school till the age of 14. As for university education, in the absence of suitable method of selection, many students not fit for it got admitted to university education. Too much importance was attached to examinations. In the circumstances, the university degree course after the higher secondary examination should be for 3 years. The existing intermediate course should be abolished. University education standard must be improved. An admission method must be changed in order that university course could be taken by capable students. Poor students should be given financial assistance. Teachers should be competent and their service conditions improved. A high standard in postgraduate studies and in pure applied research should be focused on. An all-India organization on the lines of the University Grants Committee of England should be set up to coordinate the activities of the different universities. The Sargent Report made many other recommendations such as liquidation of adult illiteracy in 20 years, adult education, which would include general or technical vocational education, not just literacy, medical checkup for students in schools, special education for the physically handicapped and mentally retarded children, setting up of employment bureaus, Warda Scheme of Basic Education, 1937. The Congress had organized an All-India Education Conference in October 1937 in Warda. In the light of the resolutions passed there, the Zakir Hussain Committee formulated a detailed national scheme for basic education. It came to be known as Nai Talim. The main principle behind the scheme was learning through activity. It was based on Gandhi's ideas published in a series of articles in the weekly Harijan. Gandhi thought that Western education had created a gulf between the educated few and the masses, and it also made the educated elite ineffective. Gandhi said, "I am fully convinced that present system of education is not only wasteful but positively harmful. They would pick up evil habits. English has created a permanent bar between the highly educated few and the uneducated many." The scheme, which advocated free and compulsory education for all from the years of 7 to 14, had the following provisions. Inclusion of a basic handicraft in the syllabus. 2. First 7 years of schooling to be an integral part of a free and compulsory nationwide education system through mother tongue. 2. Teaching to be in the mother tongue, Hindi to be taught in areas where it was not the mother tongue. E4. Ways to be devised to establish contact with the community around schools through service. V. A suitable technique to be devised with a view to implementing the main idea of basic education, educating the child through the medium of productive activity of a suitable craft such as spinning and weaving, carpentry, agriculture, pottery, leatherwork, home science for girls, etc. Vi. The social and scientific implications of a craft to be studied. Mathematics, general science, social studies, painting, music, and physical education to be part of the curriculum. V8. No religious and moral education included. The system, rather than being a methodology for education, was an expression of an idea for a new life and a new society. The basic premise was that only through such a scheme could India be an independent and nonviolent society. This scheme was child-centered and cooperative. There was not much development of this idea because of the start of the Second World War and the resignation of the Congress ministries, October 1939. The Sargent Plan was not acceptable to many L&D and educationists who felt that the projected period of 40 years for attaining the universalization of primary education was too long. The cost of implementing the plan also seemed to be exorbitant. The idea of creating the same level of educational attainment in India as prevailed in England was considered to be utopian and impracticable, besides being unsuitable for Indian conditions. With hindsight, one may say that the plan was realistic and had several good points about it. But the plan was a little ahead of its times. Development of vernacular education. During the early 19th century, vernacular education was in a sorry state of affairs. It was mostly dependent on contributions from wealthy zamindars. 1835, 1836, 1838. William Adams' reports on vernacular education in Bengal and Bihar pointed out defects in the system of vernacular education. James Jonathan's experiments in Northwest Provinces UP, as the lieutenant governor there, included opening one government school as model school in each Tehsildari, and a normal school for teachers training for vernacular schools. 1853, in a famous minute, Lord Dalhousie expressed strong opinion in favor of vernacular education. 1854, Wood's Despatch made the following provisions for vernacular education. 1. Improvement of standards. 2. Supervision by government agency. 3. Normal schools to train teachers. These gave impetus to the cause of vernacular education. 1854. 71. The government paid some attention to secondary and vernacular education. The number of vernacular schools increased by more than fivefold. 1882. The Hunter Commission held that states should make special efforts for extension and improvement of vernacular education. Mass education was to be seen as instructing masses through vernaculars. 1904, education policy put special emphasis on vernacular education and increased grants for it. 1929, Hartog Committee presented a gloomy picture of primary education. 1937, these schools received encouragement from Congress ministries. Development of technical education. The Engineering College at Roorkee was set up in 1847. The Calcutta College of Engineering came up in 1856. In 1858, Overseer School at Pune was raised to the status of Pune College of Engineering and affiliated to Bombay University. Guindy College of Engineering was affiliated to Madras University. Medical training started with the establishment of a medical college in Calcutta in 1835. Lord Curzon did much to broaden the whole basis of professional courses: medicine, agriculture, engineering, veterinary sciences, etc. He established an agriculture college at PUSA, which acted as a parent institution of similar institutions in other provinces. Evaluation of British policy on education. 1. Even the inadequate measures the government took for the expansion of modern education were guided by concerns other than philanthropic. The government measures for promotion of education were influenced by agitation in favor of modern education by enlightened Indians, Christian missionaries, and humanitarian officials. The need to ensure a cheap supply of educated Indians to man an increasing number of subordinate posts in administration and in British business concerns. Thus, there was an emphasis on English medium as the language of administration and of education. The hope that educated Indians would help expand market for British manufactures in India, and an expectation that Western education would reconcile Indians to British rule, particularly as it glorified British conquerors and their administration. The British thus wanted to use modern education to strengthen the foundations of their political authority in India. 2. Traditional system of Indian learning gradually declined for want of support, and especially after 1844 when it was declared that applicants for government employment should possess knowledge of English. Mass education was neglected, leading to widespread illiteracy, percent and in percent, which created a wide linguistic and cultural gulf between the educated few and the masses. 4. Since education was to be paid for, it became a monopoly of upper and richer classes and city dwellers. There was an almost total neglect of women's education because the government did not want to arouse wrath of orthodox sections, and it had no immediate utility for the colonial rule. 6. Scientific and technical education was by and large neglected. By 1857, there were only 3 medical colleges at Calcutta, Bombay, and Madras, and only 1 good engineering college at Roorkee, which was open only to Europeans and Eurasians. Summary. Steps taken under company rule, various colleges established, under Charter Act of 1813, Orientalist Anglican Controversy, Macaulay's Minute, efforts of Thompson, Wood's Despatch of 1854. After the Crown took over, Hunter Education Commission, Indian Universities Act of 1904, Government Resolution on Education Policy 1913, Sadler University Commission 1917-19, Education under Diarchy, Hartog Committee 1929, Wardhaus Scheme, Sargent Plan 1944, Development of Vernacular Education, Development of Technical Education, Evaluation of British Policy. Chapter: Peasant Movements, Peasantry under Colonialism. The impoverishment of the Indian peasantry was a direct result of the transformation of the agrarian structure due to colonial economic policies, ruin of the handicrafts leading to overcrowding of land, the new land revenue system, and colonial administrative and judicial system. The peasants suffered from high rents, illegal levies, arbitrary evictions, and unpaid labor in zamindari areas. In Rayatwari areas, the government itself levied heavy land revenue. The overburdened farmer, fearing loss of his only source of livelihood, often approached the local moneylender, who made full use of the former's difficulties by extracting high rates of interest on the money lent. Often the farmer had to mortgage his land and cattle. Sometimes, the moneylender seized the mortgaged belongings. Gradually, over large areas, the actual cultivators were reduced to the status of tenants at will, sharecroppers, and landless laborers. The peasants often resisted the exploitation, and soon they realized that their real enemy was the colonial state. Sometimes the desperate peasants took to crime to come out of intolerable conditions. These crimes included robbery, dacoity, and what has been called social banditry. A survey of early peasant movements. Indigo Revolt 1859-60 in Bengal. The indigo planters, nearly all Europeans, exploited the local peasants by forcing them to grow indigo on their lands instead of the more paying crops like rice. The planters forced the peasants to take advance sums and enter into fraudulent contracts which were then used against the peasants. The planters intimidated the peasants through kidnappings, illegal confinements, flogging, attacks on women and children, seizure of cattle, burning and demolition of houses, and destruction of crops. The anger of the peasants exploded in 1859 when led by Digambar Biswas and Bishnu Biswas of Nadia district. They decided not to grow indigo under duress and resisted the physical pressure of the planters and their Lathios retainers, backed by police and the courts. They also organized a counterforce against the planters' attacks. The planters also tried methods like evictions and enhanced rents. The ryots replied by going on a rent strike, by refusing to pay the enhanced rents, and by physically resisting the attempts to evict them. Gradually, they learned to use the legal machinery and initiated legal action supported by fund collection. The Bengali intelligentsia played a significant role by supporting the peasants' cause through newspaper campaigns, organization of mass meetings, preparing memoranda on peasants' grievances, and supporting them in legal battles. The government appointed an indigo commission to inquire into the problem of indigo cultivation. Based on its recommendations, the government issued a notification in November 1860 that the ryots could not be compelled to grow indigo, and that it would ensure that all disputes were settled by legal means. But the planters were already closing down factories, and indigo cultivation was virtually wiped out from Bengal by the end of Pabna agrarian leagues during the SNS. Large parts of eastern Bengal witnessed agrarian unrest caused by oppressive practices of the zamindars. The zamindars resorted to enhanced rents beyond legal limits and prevented the tenants from acquiring occupancy rights under Act X of 1859. To achieve their ends, the zamindars resorted to forcible evictions, seizure of cattle and crops, and prolonged costly litigation in courts where the poor peasant found himself at a disadvantage. Having had enough of the oppressive regime, the peasants of Yusuf Shahi Pargana in Pabna district formed an agrarian league or combination to resist the demands of the zamindars. The league organized a rent strike. The ryots refused to pay the enhanced rents, challenging the zamindars in the courts. Funds were raised by ryots to fight the court cases. The struggle spread throughout Pabna and to other districts of East Bengal. The main form of struggle was that of legal resistance. There was very little violence. Though the peasant discontent continued to linger on till 1885, most of the cases had been solved, partially through official persuasion, and partially because of zamindars' fears. Many peasants were able to acquire occupancy rights and resist enhanced rents. The government also promised to undertake legislation to protect the tenants from the worst aspects of zamindari oppression. In 1885, the Bengal Tenancy Act was passed. Again, a number of young Indian intellectuals supported the peasants' cause. These included Bankim Chandra Chatterjee, R.C. Dutt, and the Indian Association under Surendranath Banerjee. Deccan riots. The ryots of Deccan region of western India suffered heavy taxation under the ryotwari system. Here again, the peasants found themselves trapped in a vicious network with the moneylender as the exploiter and the main beneficiary. These moneylenders were mostly outsiders, Marwaris or Gujaratis. The conditions had worsened due to a crash in cotton prices after the end of the American Civil War in 1864, the government's decision to raise the land revenue by 50% in 1867, and a succession of bad harvests. In 1874, the growing tension between the moneylenders and the peasants resulted in a social boycott movement organized by the ryots against the outsider moneylenders. The ryots refused to buy from their shops. No peasant would cultivate their fields. The barbers, washermen, shoemakers would not serve them. This social boycott spread rapidly to the villages of Pune, Ahmednagar, Sholapur, and Satara. Soon the social boycott was transformed into agrarian riots with systematic attacks on the moneylenders' houses and shops. The debt bonds and deeds were seized and publicly burnt. The government succeeded in repressing the movement. As a conciliatory measure, the Deccan Agriculturist Relief Act was passed in. This time also, the modern nationalist intelligentsia of Maharashtra supported the peasants' cause. Changed nature of peasant movements after 1857. Peasants emerged as the main force in agrarian movements, fighting directly for their own demands. The demands were centered almost wholly on economic issues. The movements were directed against the immediate enemies of the peasant, foreign planters, and indigenous zamindars and moneylenders. The struggles were directed towards specific and limited objectives and redressal of particular grievances. Colonialism was not the target of these movements. It was not the objective of these movements to end the system of subordination or exploitation of the peasants. Territorial reach was limited. There was no continuity of struggle or long-term organization. The peasants developed a strong awareness of their legal rights and asserted them in and outside the courts. Weaknesses: there was a lack of an adequate understanding of colonialism. The 19th century peasants did not possess a new ideology and a new social, economic, and political program. These struggles, however militant, occurred within the framework of the old societal order, lacking a positive conception of an alternative society. Later movements, the peasant movements of the 20th century, were deeply influenced by and had a marked impact on the national freedom struggle. Refer to the chapters on freedom movement for Champaran and Keta Satyagraha. The Kisan Sabha movement, after the 1857 revolt, the Awadh Talukdars had got back their lands. This strengthened the hold of the Talukdars, or big landlords, over the agrarian society of the province. The majority of the cultivators were subjected to high rents, summary evictions, betakali, illegal levies, renewal fees, or nazrana. The First World War had hiked the prices of food and other necessities. This worsened the conditions of the UP peasants. Mainly due to the efforts of the Home Rule activists, Kisan Sabhas were organized in UP. The United Provinces Kisan Sabha was set up in February by Gauri Shankar Mishra and Indra Narayan Dwivedi. Madan Mohan Malavia supported their efforts. By June 1919, the UP Kisan Sabha had 450 branches. Other prominent leaders included Jinguri Singh, Durgapal Singh, and Baba Ramchandra. In June 1920, Baba Ramchandra urged Nehru to visit these villages. During these visits, Nehru developed close contacts with the villagers. In October 1920, the Awadh Kisan Sabha came into existence because of differences in nationalist ranks. The Awadh Kisan Sabha asked the Kisans to refuse to till betakali land, not to offer hari and bigar forms of unpaid labor, to boycott those who did not accept these conditions, and to solve their disputes through panchayats. From the earlier forms of mass meetings and mobilization, the patterns of activity changed rapidly in January 1921 to the looting of bazaars, houses, granaries, and clashes with the police. The centers of activity were primarily the districts of Raebareli, Faizabad, and Sultanpur. The movement declined soon, partly due to government repression, and partly because of the passing of the Awadh Rent Amendment Act. Aka movement. Towards the end of 1921, peasant discontent resurfaced in some northern districts of the United Provinces, Hardoi, Bahraich, Sitapur. The issues involved were I. High rents 50% higher than the recorded rates, T. Oppression of thikadars in charge of revenue collection, and T. Practice of share rents. The meetings of the Ika, or the Unity Movement, involved a symbolic religious ritual in which the assembled peasants vowed that they would pay only the recorded rent but would pay it on time, not leave when evicted, refuse to do forced labor, give no help to criminals, and abide by panchayat decisions. The grassroots leadership of the Ika movement came from Madari Pasi and other low-caste leaders, and many small zamindars. By March 1922, severe repression by authorities brought the movement to an end. Mapila, revolt. The Mapilas were the Muslim tenants inhabiting the Malabar region, where most of the landlords were Hindus. The Mapilas had expressed their resentment against the oppression of the landlords during the 19th century also. Their grievances centered around lack of security of tenure, high rents, renewal fees, and other oppressive exactions. The Mapila tenants were particularly encouraged by the demand of the local Congress body for a government legislation regulating tenant-landlord relations. Soon, the Mapila movement merged with the ongoing Khilafat agitation. The leaders of the Khilafat non-cooperation movement like Gandhi, Shaukat Ali, and Maulana Azad addressed Mapila meetings. After the arrest of national leaders, the leadership passed into the hands of local Mapila leaders. Things took a turn for the worse in August 1921, when the arrest of a respected priest leader, Ali Musaliar, sparked off large-scale riots. Initially, the symbols of British authority, courts, police stations, treasuries, and offices, and unpopular landlords, Genmis who were mostly Hindus, were the targets. But once the British declared martial law and repression began in earnest, the character of the rebellion underwent a definite change. Many Hindus were seen by the Mapilas to be helping the authorities. What began as an anti-government and anti-landlord affair acquired communal overtones. The communalization of the rebellion completed the isolation of the Mapilas from the Khilafat non-cooperation movement. By December 1921, all resistance had come to a stop. Bardoli Satyagraha, the Bardoli Taluka in Surat district, had witnessed intense politicization after the coming of Gandhi on the national political scene. The movement sparked off in January 1926 when the authorities decided to increase the land revenue by 30%. The Congress leaders were quick to protest, and a Bardoli inquiry committee was set up to go into the issue. The committee found the revenue hike to be unjustified. In February 1926, Vallabhbhai Patel was called to lead the movement. The women of Bardoli gave him the title of Sardar. Under Patel, the Bardoli peasants resolved to refuse payments of the revised assessment until the government appointed an independent tribunal or accepted the current amount as full payment. To organize the movement, Patel set up 13 Shavanis or workers' camps in the Taluka. Bardoli Satyagraha Patrika was brought out to mobilize public opinion. An intelligence wing was set up to make sure all the tenants followed the movement's resolutions. Those who opposed the movement faced a social boycott. Special emphasis was placed on the mobilization of women. K. Munshi and Lalji Naranji resigned from the Bombay Legislative Council in support of the movement. By August 1928, massive tension had built up in the area. There were prospects of a railway strike in Bombay. Gandhi reached Bardoli to stand by in case of any emergency. The government was looking for a graceful withdrawal now. It set the condition that first the enhanced rent be paid by all the occupants, not actually done. Then, a committee went into the whole affair and found the revenue hike to be unjustified and recommended a rise of 6.03% only. During the 1930s, the peasant awakening was influenced by the Great Depression in the industrialized countries and the civil disobedience movement, which took the form of no rent, no revenue movement in many areas. Also, after the decline of the active phase movement 1932, many new entrants to active politics started looking for suitable outlets for release of their energies and took to organization of peasants. The All India Kisan Congress, Sabha. This Sabha was founded in Lucknow in April 1936 with Swami Sahajanand Saraswati as the president and N.G. Ranga as the general secretary. A Kisan manifesto was issued, and a periodical under Indulo Yagnik started. The AICs and the Congress held their sessions in Faispur in 1936. The Congress manifesto, especially the agrarian policy for the 1,937 provincial elections, was strongly influenced by the AICs agenda. Under Congress ministries, the period 1937-39 was the high watermark of the peasant movements and activity under the Congress provincial rule. The chief form of mobilization was through holding Kisan conferences and meetings where demands were aired and resolutions were passed. Mobilization campaigns were carried out in the villages, peasant activity in provinces. Kerala, in the Malabar region, the peasants were mobilized mainly by the Congress Socialist Party activists. Many Karshak Sangams, peasants' organizations, came into existence. The most popular method was the marching of Jats or peasants groups to the landlords to get their demands accepted. One significant campaign by the peasants was in 1938 for the amendment of the Malabar Tenancy Act, 1929. Andhra, this region had already witnessed a decline in the prestige of zamindars after their defeat by congressmen in elections. Anti-zamindar movements were going on in some places. Many provincial riot associations were active. Ranga had set up in 1933 the India Peasants Institute. After 1936, the Congress Socialists started organizing the peasants. At many places, the summer schools of economics and politics were held and addressed by leaders like P.C. Joshi, Ajoy Ghosh, and R&D Bardwash. Bihar here, Sajanand Saraswati was joined by Karyanand Sharma, Yadunandan Sharma, Rahul Sankrityayan, Panchanan Sharma, Jamunkarjiti, etc. In 1935, the Provincial Kisan Conference adopted the anti-zamindari slogan. The Provincial Kisan Sabha developed a rift with the Congress over the Bakash land issue because of an unfavorable government resolution which was not acceptable to the Sabha. The movement died out by August 1939. Punjab, the earlier peasant mobilization here, had been organized by the Punjab Naujawan Bharat Sabha, the Kirti Kisan Party, the Congress, and the Akalis. A new direction to the movement was given by the Punjab Kisan Committee in 1937. The main targets of the movement were the landlords of Western Punjab who dominated the Unionist ministry. The immediate issues taken up were resettlement of land revenue in Amritsar and Lahore, an increase in water rates in canal colonies of Multan and Montgomery, where feudal levies were being demanded by the private contractors. Here, the peasants went on a strike and were finally able to win concessions. The peasant activity in Punjab was mainly concentrated in Jalandhar, Amritsar, Hoshiarpur, Liaupur, and Shekhupura. The Muslim tenants at will of West Punjab and the Hindu peasants of southeastern Punjab, today's Haryana, remained largely unaffected. Peasant activity was also organized in Bengal, Burdwan and Parganas, Assam, Surma Valley, Orissa, Central Provinces, and NWFP. During the war, because of a pro-war line adopted by the communists, the AICs was split on communist and non-communist lines, and many veteran leaders like Sajanand, Indulal Yagnik, and N.G. Ranga left the Sabha, but the Kisan Sabha continued to work among the people. It did notable work during the famine of 1943, post-war phase. Tebaga movement. In September 1946, the Bengal Provincial Kisan Sabha gave a call to implement, through mass struggle, the Flood Commission recommendations of Tebaga, 2/3 share. To the Bargadars, the sharecroppers also known as Bagchasi or Adyar, instead of the 1/2 share. The Bargadars worked on lands rented from the Jotadars. The communist cadres, including many urban student militias, went to the countryside to organize the Bargadars. The central slogan was Nij Kamari Dan Tolo, i.e. sharecroppers taking the paddy to their own threshing floor and not to the jotedar's house as before so as to enforce tabhaga. Storm center of the movement was North Bengal, principally among Rajbanshis, a low caste of tribal origin. Muslims also participated in large numbers. The movement dissipated soon because of the League Ministry's SOP of the Bargadari Bill and intensified repression. The popularization of the Hindu Mahasabha's agitation for a separate Bengal and renewed riots in Calcutta, which ended the prospects of sympathetic support from the urban sections. Telangana movement. This was the biggest peasant guerrilla war of modern Indian history, affecting 3,000 villages and 3 million population. The princely state of Hyderabad under Sajahi Nizams was marked by a combination of religious linguistic domination, by a Mal Urdu-speaking Muslim elite ruling over predominantly Hindu Telugu, Marathi, Kannada-speaking groups, total lack of political and civil liberties, grossest forms of forced exploitation by Deshmukhs, Jagirdars, Doris landlords, in forms of forced labor vethi and illegal exactions. During the war, the communist-led guerrillas had built a strong base in Telangana villages through Andhra Mahasabha, and had been leading local struggles on issues such as wartime exactions, abuse of rationing, excessive rent, and vethi. The uprising began in July 1946, when a Deshmukh's thug murdered a village militant in Jangan Taluk of Nalgonda. Soon the uprising spread to Warangal and Khammam. The peasants organized themselves into village sangams and attacked using lathis, stone slings, and chili powder. They had to face brutal repression. The movement was at its greatest intensity between August 1947 and September 1948. The peasants brought about a rout of the Razakars, the Nizam's stormtroopers. Once the Indian security forces took over Hyderabad, the movement fizzled out. The Telangana movement had many positive achievements to its credit. In the villages controlled by guerrillas, vethi and forced labor disappeared. Agricultural wages were raised. Illegally seized lands were restored. Steps were taken to fix ceilings and redistribute lands. Measures were taken to improve irrigation and fight cholera. An improvement in the condition of women was witnessed. The autocratic feudal regime of India's biggest princely state was shaken up, clearing the way for the formation of Andhra Pradesh on linguistic lines and realizing another aim of the national movement in this region. Balance sheet of peasant movements. These movements created an atmosphere for post-independence agrarian reforms, for instance, abolition of zamindari, wathay, eroded the power of the landed class, thus adding to the transformation of the agrarian structure. These movements were based on the ideology of nationalism. The nature of these movements was similar in diverse areas. Summary: peasantry under colonialism, early peasant movements, Indigo Revolt, Pabna agrarian. Leagues, Deccan riots, change in nature of movements after 1857, weaknesses, latter movements, Kisan Sabha, Eka, Mapila Revolt, Bardoli Satyagraha, All India Kisan Congress. Under Congress ministries, peasant activity in the past, during the war, post-war period, balance sheet. Chapter 32. The movement of the working class. The beginning of the second half of the 19th century heralded the entry of modern industry into India. The thousands of hands employed in construction of railways were harbingers of the modern Indian working class. Further industrialization came with the development of ancillary industries along with the railways. The coal industry developed fast and employed a large working force. Then came the cotton and the jute industries. The Indian working class suffered from the same kind of exploitation witnessed during the industrialization of Europe and the rest of the West, such as low wages, long working hours, unhygienic and hazardous working conditions, employment of child labor, and the absence of basic amenities. The presence of colonialism in India gave a distinctive touch to the Indian working class movement. The Indian working class had to face two basic antagonistic forces, an imperialist political rule and economic exploitation at the hands of both foreign and native capitalist classes. Under the circumstances, inevitably, the Indian working class movement became intertwined with the political struggle for national emancipation. Early efforts. The early nationalists, especially the moderates, were indifferent to the labor's cause, differentiated between the labor in the Indian-owned factories and those in the British-owned factories, believed that labor legislations would affect the competitive edge enjoyed by the Indian-owned industries, did not want a division in the movement on the basis of classes, and did not support the Factory Acts of 1881 and 1891. For these reasons, thus earlier attempts to improve the economic conditions of the workers were in the nature of the philanthropic efforts which were isolated, sporadic, and aimed at specific local grievances. 1870 Sasipada Banerjee started a working men's club and newspaper, Bharat Shramjeevi. 1878 Saurabji Shapurji Bengali tried to get a bill providing better working conditions to labor, passed in the Bombay Legislative Council. 1880 Narayan Meghaji Lokhande started the newspaper Dain Bandhu and set up the Bombay Mill and Mill Hands Association. 1899 The first strike by the Great Indian Peninsular Railways took place, and it got widespread support. Tilak's Khazari and Maharatha had been campaigning for the strike for months. There were many prominent nationalist leaders like Bipin Chandra Pal and G. Subramanya Iyer who demanded better conditions for workers and other pro-labor reforms. During Swadeshi upsurge, workers participated in wider political issues. Strikes were organized by Ashwini Kumar Banerjee, Prabhat Kumar Roy Chaudhuri, Premtosh Bose, and Apurba Kumar Ghosh. These strikes were organized in government press, railways, and the jute industry. There were attempts to form trade unions, but these were not very successful. Subramania Siva and Chidambaram Pillai led strikes in Tuticorin and Tirunelveli and were arrested. The biggest strike of the period was organized after Tilak's arrest and trial. During the First World War and after the war and its aftermath brought a rise in exports, soaring prices, massive profiteering opportunities for the industrialists but very low wages for the workers. This led to discontent among workers. The emergence of Gandhi led to a broad-based national movement, and the emphasis was placed on the mobilization of the workers and peasants for the national cause. A need was felt for the organization of the workers in trade unions. International events like the establishment of a socialist republic in the Soviet Union, formation of the Comintern, and setting up of International Labor Organization ILO lent a new dimension to the movement of the working class in India. The AITUC, the All India Trade Union Congress, was founded on October. The Indian National Congress president for the year, Lala Lajpat Rai, was elected as the first president of AITUC and Dewan Shaman Lal as the first general secretary. Lajpat Rai was the first to link capitalism with imperialism. Imperialism and militarism are the twin children of capitalism. Prominent Congress and Swarajist leader C.R. Das presided over the third and the fourth sessions of the AI-2C. The Gaia session of the Congress 1922 welcomed the formation of the AI-2C, and a committee was formed to assist it. C.R. Das advocated that the Congress should take up the workers' and peasants' cause and incorporate them in the struggle for Swaraj, or else they would get isolated from the movement. Other leaders who kept close contacts with the AI-2C included Nehru, Subhas Bose, C.F. Andrews, J.M. Sengupta, Satyamurthy, V.V. Giri, and Sarojini Naidu. In the beginning, the AI-2C was influenced by social democratic ideas of the British Labour Party. The Gandhian philosophy of nonviolence, trusteeship, and class collaboration had great influence on the movement. Gandhi helped organize the Ahmedabad Textile Labour Association 1918, and through a protest secured a 27.5% wage hike. Later, the Arbitrators Award ensured a 35% raise. The Trade Union Act 1926. The Trade Union Act 1926 recognized trade unions as legal associations, laid down conditions for registration and regulation of trade union activities, and secured immunity, both civil and criminal, for trade unions from prosecution for legitimate activities, but put some restrictions on their political activities. Late 1920s, a strong communist influence on the movement lent a militant and revolutionary content to it. There was a 6-month-long strike in Bombay textile mills led by the Gurney Kamgar Union. The whole of 1928 witnessed unprecedented industrial unrest. This period also saw the crystallization of various communist groups, with leaders like S.A. Dange, Muzaffar Ahmed, P.C. Joshi, Sohan Singh Joshi, etc. Alarmed at the increasing strength of the trade union movement under extremist influence, the government resorted to legislative restrictions. It passed the Public Safety Ordinance 1929 and the Trade Disputes Act TDA 1929. The TDA 1929 made compulsory the appointment of courts of inquiry and consultation boards for settling industrial disputes, made illegal the strikes in public utility services like posts, railways, water, and electricity, unless each individual worker planning to go on strike gave an advance notice of 1 month to the administration, and forbade trade union activity of coercive or purely political nature and even sympathetic strikes. Mira Conspiracy Case 1929. In March 1929, the government arrested 31 labor leaders, and the 3.5-year trial resulted in the conviction of Muzaffar Ahmed, S.A. Dange, Jogulkar, Philip Spratt, Ben Bradley, Shaukat Usmani, and others. The trial got worldwide publicity but weakened the working class movement. The workers participated during 1930 in the civil disobedience movement. But after 1931, there was a dip in the working class movement because of a split in 1931 in which the corporatist trend led by N.M. Joshi broke away from the AI-2C to set up the All India Trade Union Federation. The communists rejoined the AI-2C. Now, the left front consisted of the communists, Congress socialists, and the leftist nationalists like Nehru and Subhas. Under Congress ministries during the 1937 elections, the AI-2C had supported the Congress candidates. The Congress governments in provinces gave a fillip to the trade union activity. The Congress ministries were generally sympathetic to the workers' demands. Many legislations favorable to the workers were passed. During and after the Second World War initially, the workers opposed the war. But after 1941, when Russia joined the war on behalf of the Allies, the communists described the war as a people's war and supported it. The communists dissociated themselves from the Quit India movement. A policy of industrial peace was advocated by the communists. In the period 1945 to 1947, workers participated actively in the post-war national upsurges. In 1945, the dock workers of Bombay and Calcutta refused to load ships taking supplies to the warring troops in Indonesia. During 1946, the workers went on a strike in support of the naval ratings. During the last year of foreign rule, there were strikes by workers of posts, railways, and many other establishments. After independence, the working class movement came to be associated with the various political ideologies. Summary: early efforts during Swadeshi movement, First World War and after, during and after the Second World War. Unit 10, Independence, and after.